Hello and welcome everyone. Looking forward to our talk today. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live hosted by Catalyst. My name is Joanna Duffett. I work at the Information Center in Catalyst, and we have a great discussion today on mental health and burnout, a DEI perspective. So to welcome you all and get this conversation kicked off and started, I want to introduce our panelists today. We have Marie-Josée Boivin, the Vice President of Human Resources at Bell. We have Kimberly Grange, the Canada Director of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity at Dentons. And then from Catalyst, we have Elisa Leary, our Senior Vice President of Human Resources. So I want to dive right in. I know this is a big topic that a lot of people are curious about right now, especially during Mental Health Awareness Month during May. So let's jump right in. Elisa, why is it so important that organizations care about mental health?
I think typically one of the things that people don't realize is that mental health is probably one of the least visible and least discussed diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI issues. Yet mental health is a fundamental part of our overall wellness. It affects how we think, how we feel, how we interact with one another, and really how we see the world. So as an employer, it's really incumbent upon us to ensure that we really pay attention and ensure that we create a safe space to understand the impact of mental health on our colleagues.
Absolutely. So how would you say that burnout and mental health issues are affecting women and people of color and other different groups differently, or maybe more severely?
Yeah, so, it's really important to understand this. Research shows us that women of color disproportionately suffer from the kinds of adverse life experiences that lead to depression, anxiety disorders, and toxic levels of chronic stress. And particularly, new mothers of color notably have a rate of postpartum depression that is about 2 to 3 times higher than the rate of all new mothers. So those are really striking statistics that we really all need to be aware of as we really look at what our workforce looks like, understanding where there's disparities and where there's potential opportunity for us as employers to really help to support our colleagues throughout the entire spectrum. So it is absolutely key. It doesn't affect everyone the same, although it does affect everyone, but there are layers of how it really hits us and our employee population.
Absolutely. It's such an issue that does affect everyone. Mental health, as you said, it's part of our overall health, but there's certain factors that can affect it or impact us in different ways. So now I want to open up to the whole group. Why is burnout, do you think, such a key issue specifically at this point in time? Kimberly, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I think, picking up on what Elisa said, there's really an effort or an issue in terms of the pandemic and a number of changes that we're seeing. One of the things we talked about before coming into this LinkedIn Live, I shared that I hit my own roadblock in October, actually. Recognizing the factors hitting everybody are going to be different. For me at that point, I slid down a wall and told my husband I was done. I didn't have anything left to give. And so I was, with the support of my team at work and my doctor, I took what turned into a 3-month leave and a gradual return to work. In my situation, I think it was a compounding effect of the pandemic, increased anxiety about losing loved ones. I'd lost my dad previously, layered into coming back from work from a parental leave and being confronted with new ways of working in a new working environment, while also juggling full-time childcare and work. And I think, again, picking up on that piece, the factors that cause burnout will be different for everybody. But what I see in common right now are the continual states of transition, of uncertainty, and change in working environments that have real impacts on our team's mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd like to add to that. I think one of the key things that when we were all sitting in an office, we were able to, automatically click off, shut down, run to the train. We knew there was a stop at the end of the day. Well, today, post COVID, and new ways of work, home is work and work is home. So
Mhm.
there's this, it's a blend that becomes even more difficult to separate yourself. So I think, as Kimberly said, what tends to happen is we end up working longer hours. We have all of these things going on at the same time. And particularly women are taking the additional burden of all of those things. So I think those are added stressors that we didn't necessarily have before on a consistent basis.
I would add also all the isolation we had to go through over the past 2 years, like birthday miss, like celebration cancel. I know here in Canada we even had curfew and so on. So again, like I think it's an element of surprise and thing we never really had to deal with. I would say also one other element in my mind is the access to care, and I think we heard a lot about that. But at a moment where we needed that care to be available to us, like there were restriction and it was harder to get access. And we know that, especially when it comes to depression and burnout and so on, like the sooner you get access to support, the faster you get to a better state. So I think that access to should not be underestimated.
For sure.
Absolutely, too. It's so important when you think about if you don't know about the resources available to you, just in the back of your mind, finding or seeking out those resources can be an additional burden on top of everything else you're already facing. So that's a great point. Now, if you're just joining us, I want to remind you we're here talking about mental health and burnout for a DEI perspective. And we just heard from our panelists about why burnout is such a specific issue now. And I think one thing we've touched on is, this difference, particularly as Elisa was saying, home is work, work is home, boundaries are really blurring. And I think that can be particularly difficult for people who have only ever worked in an office environment or on a shop floor environment, always a very traditional workplace. And so haven't been used to remote work or even a hybrid form of work. I know for a lot of industries, particularly like law firms, they've been incredibly FaceTime focused. So, Kim, I'm wondering how, for Denton's, a traditionally FaceTime focused industry, how has that shift to hybrid work maybe affected your employees or impacted your organizational strategy?
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. And I think that, in some ways people might be surprised by the answer here. You might assume that a movement from or a focus on FaceTime to hybrid might actually be a positive shift. But I think it's really important to recognize that a shift to hybrid work actually is going to affect people's mental health in very different ways. So for some, the idea of coming into the office and, having to deal with microinequities is going to be it's going to be incredibly hard. For others, the idea of working from home is, really challenging as well. And I think we also have to really recognize that from a human experiential perspective, it's hard to equate the in-person experience and the experience in a remote setting. So this can really be tough on the individual who's working remotely and worried about what they might be missing out on, or even the manager who's really trying hard to bridge that experience gap for their team. So to address these issues, I think, the foundation of any strategy about hybrid work has to be education. So ensuring leaders are sensitive to the fact that people's experiences are going to be different in a hybrid environment. What does that mean in practical terms? I think it's really about the importance of layering in inclusion to your strategy by educating managers to be mindful of who isn't in the room and ensuring they're not talking about file issues when team members aren't present. So, we're short on time, but a really quick example that was shared with me is you're in a room, there's somebody in the room with you and somebody on the phone. You're talking about a file, you conclude, the person on the phone hangs up, and the person beside you says, "Oh, wait, I forgot to raise a point." So an inclusive and an empathetic manager would say, they would not proceed with the conversation. They say, okay, hold on, let's get so-and-so back on the line. So, it's missing out on these small pieces of information that over time can actually have a compounding effect on somebody's ability to participate, to take advantage of opportunities and advance in their careers. Addressing these issues it's not impossible, but it does take a lot of conscious engagement on the part of the organization and the managers. So an important plug here too is really important to check in with your managers as well to see how they're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like you shared. Thank you for sharing earlier your story about how you took your own leave. I think that idea of lots of small experiences or hurdles really adding up and compounding is something a lot of people can identify with. But great. Thank you so much. So now too, I think, that easy access and making check-ins and that kind of thing a good habit are one really important piece of the puzzle. I think another one too, I know we're talking about it here now, but I think there's still a huge stigma for a lot of people for talking about mental health issues. And that can really be a barrier in a wider mental health discussion. Now, I know Bell has addressed this in some of their strategies. So Marie-Josée, I was wondering if you could walk us through what Bell has done.
Yes, I think the best way to break the stigma is through awareness and education. And I call it creating a common language and like putting words in people's mouths so they can openly talk about what they're feeling, and even for leader to fully understand how how people are feeling. And the way we did it at Bell is there's different steps that we took, but one was actually a formal program that we created with 3 different modules that kind of demystify what mental health is and how, as a leader, you should be behaving, and even you as an individual, how you impact mental health of people. So I get going through that program, which is mandatory actually for all our people leader. To my earlier point, allowed us to create some sort of a common experience and a common language, because people could refer to what they learn in the classroom, saying, in that module when we were discussing about this and this, like, this is how I feel. And it was kind of a good opener for some conversation. But I think pair with that, we need to have consistent awareness session. And like we have 3 periods in the year at Bell where we provide that during our Bell Let's Talk campaign, during the mental health week and the mental illness awareness week too. So where we every year build specific curriculum and touch different subject. Like this week, actually, a big subject is about relationship and rebuilding relationship, because we were talking about that hybrid workforce and coming back to the office and like I call it, the need that we have to become social creature again. Like, I guess what used to be so normal to us prior to the pandemic is not necessarily, we don't know how to behave with our colleagues and so on. The other element that we added this week was nutrition, because we know how nutrition is so important to mental health. So again, like, it's about talking and educating people on subject of mental health, but also finding what helps and support the wellness in general of employees.
Thank you. And just a welcome to anyone who's now currently joining us. We're talking mental health and burnout, a DEI perspective. So Marie-Josée, you were talking about, being aware of those different strategies. And so we've touched on this a little bit, but maybe Kim, could you walk us through some ideas for what leaders can do to support their teams and employees?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about this before, and 3 things really came to mind. One of which really picks up on Marie-Josée was just talking about, which was, the trainings available. So first off, know what resources are available to you and your teams. So whether there's trainings for managers, if you have any employee and family assistance programs, or even resources through partner organizations like Catalyst, really important to tap into. Also, number 2, know what an empathetic leader looks like. An empathetic leader is somebody who demonstrates care and concern and understanding for employees' life circumstances. And then 3, think about how you fit in on that spectrum. So consider how and where and when you model empathy as a leader. Do you get to know individuals on your team? Are you checking in? Are you listening versus hearing? Do you consider and seek different perspectives? Do you foster inclusion within the team? So each of these are really important ways leaders can support their teams by taking an inclusive approach to mental health as well.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Kimberly just said, and she's so spot on about that. But the other piece of that is there has to be a level of intentionality about your approach. You just have to understand that it is critical, particularly if you are a people leader in your organization, that it's something that is all part of your tool belt. Particularly in a remote or hybrid environment, you have to understand it's a critical thing for you to understand. And if you don't provide that support, then you're contributing. You're not contributing to an environment where it's open, it's honest, and your team can come to you comfortably. So you have to open up that space, but you have to do it with intention.
I would say don't underestimate the value of reward and recognition, and especially in the current context too. Like people are looking for repères, like pieces that reinforce the fact that they're doing the right thing, they're going in the right direction. And I think we needed that more over the past 2 years than we ever had, because we did not have the natural one that we used to have, like the pat on the shoulder, the person walking by your desk telling you like you're doing a good job, you're going in the right direction. So I think we have to go the extra mile. And I guess it goes to Kimberly's point about the self-awareness and understanding your employee, but recognition and reward is key. The other thing too is, and I think when you work virtually and when you work in uncertainty, the checkpoint and making sure that people understand what they are supposed to be focusing on. And we had a lot of change in the past 2 years. We were going one course, then it was changed when we were stopping and going. So again, like all that change, I think it's so important and key for a leader to go back and revalidate with their team what they should be focusing on. Purpose. We did a lot of work with our executive at Bell, creating a resilience program, but and teaching about purpose and being able to, again, like make it relevant for people on why they're working on such thing and how it's going to be impacting and making decision. I would say finally the last element is really creating workplace where you have growth mindset and ability to learn safely, make mistake, and grow from it. And I think that's what like the last 2 years have shown us, is that the company that were able to adapt and like readjust course and so on, like we're the one that were a little bit ahead. So I would say all those elements are very key in helping our employees stay mentally happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That intentionality, I think, is so key across a wide variety, like Kim was saying, just taking that extra time in a meeting to make sure that everyone's voices are heard. If you're working in a different way where things just aren't as natural, or as a manager, making time to intentionally check in. And I really liked what you said, Marie-Josée, about the purpose, because, we have coming out very shortly a topic overview from Catalyst on burnout, and how that actually manifests in different employees. And one thing, if you're burnt out, you can be very cynical, very pessimistic about your job, your outlook. And one of the things that's been proven to kind of combat that and prevent it is having that strong connection to whether that's the mission or the purpose, or just really centering yourselves with those goals that can help avoid that kind of cynicism that leads to burnout, or is part of burnout. And Kim, you also mentioned empathy. That's a big focus for us here at Catalyst as well. Elisa, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, we've done some really great work there in terms of putting out that empathy isn't just a something that is a good to have. It's a must have. and why it's really very important for us to understand the power of empathy as a people leader, and just as a human being. But in the workplace, what it does for us is it gives people the level of support. It gives them a voice. It makes them feel seen and heard, and all of those things contribute to the uplifting of our state, the state of who we are. And the more empathetic a manager is, they're opening up that space, particularly the safe space, so that you destigmatize how a person is feeling at the moment. You know, I'm probably dating myself, but I come out of a retail background, and oftentimes you would hear this phrase over and over and over again: oh, get over yourself, toughen up. And now we're starting to understand that, you know, those things are detrimental to who we are. You know, it starts to build, and you're not able to really be who you are, be your best self, be your most productive self. So being an empathetic leader, and just really exercising empathy really helps, not only you from a self-awareness perspective, but really brings voice to your team and allows them to feel seen and heard.
Absolutely. And links should be popping up right now for more of our Catalyst resources on empathy. So I invite everyone to take a look at those. If you're just joining us, we still have a little bit of time here in our live on mental health and burnout, a DEI perspective. We've got great panelists here. We've been having a wonderful discussion. I want to invite anyone in the audience to go ahead and post any questions they might have. We do have one that's great. And I think we've touched on it a little bit, but, you know, like, say you have an employee, you know, if the question is, if someone is struggling with mental health issues, you know, and as a manager, what can I do to support them? Like, what can I do in the moment?
Yeah. I think, just to piggyback on what I just said, is really lending a voice, listening. Listening becomes very, very important, so that you can understand if there's a level of support that you can give them. But also, I think the other piece that we all need to be aware of, we're not medical professionals, but what we are here for is to provide, if within your organization there are, you know, there's EAP programs and things of that nature, you can always refer your colleague to that. But I think first and foremost is to truly understand what is happening at that moment in time, and show support and empathy, and, you know, provide resources. So that I would think is the most important first step.
Yeah, I think, Eliza, I think it's so key. Some people feel that they need to solve the problem of the individual when they need to listen and direct them to the right place. And employee assistance program is an amazing place. Some other, like, I think through the pandemic, we all built a big library of support material that we can refer people to, but like showing them where they can find help is probably the biggest gift you can give someone.
One last thing I'll add is picking up on, and I agree with everything, but picking up on one of Elisa's earlier points, which focused on the intentionality. So really important also, just upfront, kind of at a baseline level, of paying attention and noticing changes that might occur in behaviors within your team. And again, in using those or opportunities to check in and not wait for people to come to you. And again, it's more recognizing you're not the expert, but really it's about that empathy and listening and helping direct them where they need.
Absolutely. I know one thing that we really stress in some of our empathy work from Catalyst is that, many of us, myself included, think of that as just an inherent skill that many people either are born with or don't have. But it's important to know that it is a skill. And like anything, you get better with practice. Mm-hmm. So again, it harkens back to that, like, being really intentional to check in with your people, and not even doing that as a Band-Aid solution, but just from the start, being genuinely interested in getting to know people as people, and not just a coworker, goes a long way towards building that foundation.
Accommodation too. I think we don't need to shy away from making the accommodation to support the individual, giving them the time to. Again, like I think it allows some people to stay even functional, although they're struggling with mental health. So I think this is something we need to reinforce even further. And in the past, I think at times it's been seen as a negative, but I think it's a positive. It's kind of a helping someone to regain the strength to get further after. So
yeah. And the more you introduce it in your workplace, these candid type of conversations, and you make it okay. I was part of an internal group conversations yesterday. And one of the comments I've made that really resonated with a lot of people is that, how do you make not being okay? But then making sure that it's reinforced when people do express that they're not okay. How do they see consistently that you're supporting them in the workplace? And then it just becomes part of, you open up that safe space for them to share certain things. And so that's really key as well.
Absolutely. Now we have a couple of questions coming in. One person asked, we need to meet our people where they are now, especially from a mental health standpoint. So any tips on how to do that?
I think it's very similar to what we just talked about. Our life experiences vary. And it's not a cookie cutter experience. Everyone sees life differently, experience it differently. Although we may be doing the same thing, there are things that are different at work, the things that are different in our personal lives. So again, I think it's about exercising empathy and just really listening. I think Kim talked about really being intentional about just pay attention to what's around you and truly be curious for the conversation. When you ask someone, how are you doing? Really wanting to hear how they're doing and not make it this just rote thing that you say just to be nice. It's really wanting to know how they're doing and understanding. And then if they're a team member, how do you then support them in the way they need to be supported? Because it may be different. If you have 20 people, there may be 19 different ways that you can support that person. So just be naturally curious.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question too, because, so many of the strategies and techniques for avoiding and preventing burnout are just that, they're preventative. But, Kim, for you, I know you reached kind of a breaking point. So can you comment on that from just your point of view, like how that was, you talked a little bit at the top of the hour on how your managers and leaders and people in your life kind of met you where you were.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think one thing too, so for anyone who just joined, I did share that I took a leave at the end of last year. But, one of the things I think important to recognize too, that even in really understanding environments and empathetic teams, sometimes it can be hard to speak up when you need help and to speak up before you get to the point of burnout. And I think that realistically, that was something that really got me, is I didn't want to admit it. And work, with everything else that was going on in my life, work was the area I could control, actually, and where investing that energy was easier for me. So I think it's, the other piece in terms of, again, echoing what's been said before, the importance of, it's not just one check-in in one moment in time, but it's over time. It's that connection point, and being really intentional, particularly when you're, you're not right beside your team members. But they also have to be able to be in that space where they're able to voice that. And that's, again, not on you, and certainly wasn't on my team. How I was received in that moment was so important. And now what I see is that it's important that I share that I took these steps, and though, I made use of the programs that were available to me through my benefits, and that the firm had, and sharing that with others so they themselves can see that it's okay to speak up early on. I think that's an important piece. And just stepping back from an organizational level, it's such a good point about meeting people where they are and recognizing your managers or leaders are going to be in different points in their own journey. So if you think about any sort of learning or resources that you offer, I think there needs to be a range from inviting people into the conversation for the first time to people who are actually quite adept and have had these conversations and finding ways for them to develop their skills. So if there's ways for you to kind of build that range, I think it will really help the organization, and recognize that then when new people come in, they'll be able to benefit from those resources too. So you're constantly tooling your leadership around these issues.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you so much. If you're just joining us, we're having a great discussion on mental health and burnout, DEI perspective. We're getting so many great comments and questions. I'd love to keep this conversation going just a little bit longer, even though I know we're pretty much at time. If we could go just a little bit over. We had one question about how to handle resentment or maybe friction from team members who don't feel like they need quote unquote accommodations.
Yeah, I think that's a really tough question because that often happens. Kim mentioned, it was tough for her to even admit it. And that's really typical. And so I think the best that you can do from an organizational perspective is typically everyone has a trusting person. So if you're paying attention, you often know, who's the best person to have a conversation, or how critical it is to build a relationship of trust. Because typically, if you have a relationship of trust, that person won't be as hesitant to listen to you because they know that you do have their best interests. So it's not a cut and dried question, because it's the reality of what happens when someone's suffering from something, from mental health that's been stigmatized. And so the work is, how do you destigmatize it, and how do you open up space so that you won't have as much resistance, so that person can recognize that you're not trying to hurt them. You are really trying to support them the best way that you can. So I think that's the simplest advice that I would give to anyone who's asking that question.
And I think we said it, like knowing your people, being able to show to them that you're noticing a change. Like you used to react like that. Today, I saw you reacting like that way. And I think as you are placing a little bit of evidence and showing that you're noticing, and more importantly, that you care, I think the person are probably going to start to listen a little bit further. But like, I think it all goes to be curious and know your people and noticing those differences and showing them.
Absolutely. I keep thinking, don't make your check-ins a checkbox. Like it's an ongoing conversation.
I love that. I'm going to steal that from you.
Yeah, just coined off the top of my head. No.
Yeah.
And as we said at the top of the conversation too, everyone has mental health. I think many of us think of, when you hear the word mental health, you immediately think of struggles people are having or issues they're facing, difficult situations they're in. But we all have mental health, just as we all have health. You can be in poor health, you can be in great health, but it changes all the time. So I think that's so important to remember too. So we had one other interesting question. Someone wanted to talk about toxic people in the workplace. Unfortunately, I know we've all probably had difficult coworkers in the past. So how can managers maybe support people who feel they are either being bullied or have a real issue with a coworker that's maybe contributing to burnout and trauma?
The best answer I have for that, coming from an HR perspective, is, we all have policies and things that we decide are okay within the workplace, and understanding that the impact of a toxic person or someone who just is not collaborative and just makes everyone's life miserable, address it. Culturally make that a thing that you as an organization, whether they are the smartest person within the entire organization, I get that, but they're doing a lot more damage. So I would just say that, make it a habit of addressing those things in a transparent way, because they do add to the additional stress and burnout of others that are around them. So recognize it, address it, listen to your people, and then move on.
One other thing I think about too is from the manager perspective. I think sometimes also managing these situations where conflict is at the basis and perpetual can also be really difficult. So if you need support in terms of those conversations, reaching out to your HR team, to other leaders within the organization, as appropriate in terms of getting the support you need to help support, again, your team in that situation, because it in itself can be, I think, stress inducing to manage those situations.
Great, thank you. Well, I know this has been a great conversation about mental health and burnout, especially from a DEI perspective. I know we've gone a little bit over, but this has been such a fruitful and illuminating conversation, I know for me, and I hope for many others. So I think we can maybe wrap up and do, I'd love to hear maybe 2 top takeaways from each of you about what leaders should know about mental health and burnout. What are your top 2 takeaways from this, or any last tips? So Marie-Josée, can we start with you?
Sure. And I think we said it many times, like, know your people, it's key. And I think education would be my second one. Don't underestimate about that, creating that common language in your organization, how it's going to help you evolve into that, dealing with mental health and supporting your employee.
Great, thank you. Kim, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for those of us listening, I think there's so many themes that came up again and again, and it's because they are the crux of these discussions. For me, the 2 top takeaways I'll leave the group with. Again, it can be hard to speak up when you need help and to speak up before you get to the point of burnout. That happens even in supportive environments. So again, that importance of knowing your team and checking in regularly with intention. And the last, burnout is contagious. If someone does go off for burnout or to support their mental health, check in with the rest of the team. I think it's really important to know that teams are there to support one another and to make space if somebody actually does need time. But as a leader, I think you also want to make sure you're supporting those other team members who are there and supporting in that moment. And we know, based on everything we discussed today, empathetic leaders help reduce burnout. So really important.
All right, and Elisa, let's wrap up with you.
Yeah, Marie-Josée and Kimberly said everything that I was going to say. So I think the 2 most important things, I think, is to really ensure that you're intentional about providing a safe space and really mean it. And then secondly, I would say to make sure that you're utilizing the resources that are available. Many of our colleagues don't even know that their organizations may have support for them. So educate yourself to whether or not that it's there and utilize it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I can't thank our panelists enough. Marie-Josée from Bell Canada, Kimberly Grange from Dentons Canada, and of course our own Elisa Leary from Catalyst. I want to thank everyone for joining us on this LinkedIn Live on mental health and burnout from a DEI perspective. I want to, of course, encourage everyone to visit Catalyst's website at catalyst.org for a ton of great resources on empathy, on mental health. As I teased, a new topic overview coming on burnout soon. So lots of resources that should help for Mental Health Awareness Month. So thank you all again, and have a great rest of your days.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.